We're going to talk about XR, extended reality, and applying that to the language classroom, culture classroom, and also looking at some tools that you can use and how they have been used, some apps that have been used in courses. So just to get, I'm a little curious, just to get like an idea, if you could put in the chat, like if you have ever experienced VR, XR, AR, and then like what that entails, like how familiar you are with that. You can kind of like start to generate some conversation. So let's start with the first slide here. Chris?
Well, we should introduce ourselves first.
Okay. All right. So I'm Kevin Richards. I teach in the Germanic languages and literatures and also do outreach and have been interested in extended reality technologies for the past like 3 years. And so usually I get a little bit of extra research money through a mentoring project, and it has been kind of going towards this. So Chris?
I'm Chris Summers. I work with the College of Arts and Sciences Technology Services unit here at Ohio State University. I am the lab manager and developer for a space called the Emerging Technology Studio. So a lot of what I do involves utilizing XR tools and pipelines to sort of help students, faculty, and staff have their sort of cool pedagogical and research and art making ideas become realities. So that's what I do. And Kevin and I are both interested sort of in the same stuff. That's how this presentation came to be. So welcome.
Yeah, looking at the chat, Beat Saber's great. Looks like some people have had some experience, and the Quest is quite a device, bit of an engineering miracle, and that has like brought that experience to many people. If you haven't had the experience in that extended reality, it's kind of hard to describe. So I'd hope like if we were in person, we'd have like a little booth where you could try these things out. My own interest in VR or XR is really, it began with sort of like noticing how during the pandemic, our numbers of majors and minors started to fall. And one of the key sort of bridges to our program, to that was study abroad, being there, being in a different space, being able to sort of like witness, understand, interact in that culture. And there's a lot of research that kind of backs up that promotes motivation and continued study for languages. And so I'm like really looking at our language department for that. For example, the students often felt after a study abroad tour that they were better at language and culture. Their self-perception was better. They were more open to the world. They made more sort of driven decisions to apply for study abroad scholarships, and they also pursued further study. And they felt empowered in their ability to pilot their learning and make their own choices. They also saw that they thought they understood different cultures better, and research showed that no matter their skill, motivation, exposure to their host family, there was a significant increase in their understanding of the other culture and their cultural sensitivity. And some problems that can come up when we're talking about study abroad is that there is a great amount of underrepresentation of people of color, people who don't have access to the types of the expense that it would cost to travel abroad, and that is one of the primary contributing factors that keep people from first studying abroad. And then there's another aspect to that, and that's sort of an anxiety or fear of that other culture, of difference. And one of those key coping strategies or cultural stressors was to have social support. And so how do you get that social support? And they even found that study abroad students, when they were abroad, didn't seek that out. So how do we, even with those who are committed to studying abroad, how do we encourage that sort of communication and connecting with others in that place? All right, so first it's about recognizing these challenges, economics, anxieties, and fears, and then providing the tools for low-risk encounters with other cultures. So social interactions in those other cultures and And this could then provide that increased cultural sensitivity and student confidence to move from this sort of virtual to a real world encounter. And so the idea is then that XR tools could be that connecting point. They could motivate and perhaps provide a secondary experience that then motivates the real world encounter that could then open students up to study abroad, experience the world, and further study of language and culture. Okay. So when you can't be there, what do? Teleport. No, not quite. There is this inexpensive way for them to feel like they're present in another place. And while we haven't figured out teleportation quite yet, we do have some communication tools that are really rapidly developing into something unlike anything we've seen before. And so this is where we look at extended reality as this sort of blanket term for 3 different modes of computer augmented interactive communication. There is VR, which is closed off from the world. There's AR, where computer generates an overlay for our world. And then there's MR, which is really the mapping of digital objects into a space, sort of like Pokemon Go. So there's a fixed location for this digital object. So VR allows you to be in other places outside of your space. AR allows you to bring digital objects into your space, and MR allows you to share your space and these digital objects with other people who either are there physically or virtually, and you can also beam yourself into other spaces, potentially anywhere that there is bandwidth that you can reach. So there is really this long history in developing the concept of science fiction, so that precedes the technology that we have today. And you might know it as like the holodeck from Star Trek or the Matrix from the popular film series. But if we go back to something like William Gibson's cyberspace, we see sort of like how economics can play a part, or Neil Stephenson's metaverse, or even the very recent Oasis in Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. But if you move even further back, we get something like Glue's Total Environment Simulator, which was really there when we first saw the first actual implementations of devices for virtual reality. And then if you go even further back to Manning's novel from 1933, you really see sort of how AI will drive virtual reality, among many other technologies that are discussed in that science fiction that are being developed almost a century later. So this concept of virtual reality in popular culture, or more from the way it has been depicted in film, is often like it's associated with some type of evil. Ever since the 70s, science fiction has had more dystopic and pessimistic visions of the future. They sell more tickets and drive drama in books. But the applications for this technology are pretty broad. And it really was first in around 2000 that there is sort of a compilation by Antonetti and others that really demonstrated in research how students were perceiving the technology, and that it depended on their field how likely they were to see its positive role in developing abstract conceptualization. All right, if we move a little bit forward. So there are some key technologies also that now are making this possible. And Meta just this week announced a 2-year blueprint for bringing out 4 new headsets, 2 professional models and 2 consumer models. And they are really impressive. Of course, there's also other competitors joining this market. Pico, which was bought by ByteDance, which owns TikTok, which is the primary headset being sold in China, is now moving into Europe and Germany, where Quests are banned. And then there's also higher end devices like the Pimax with its wide field of view, or Vario with its real eye resolution. And of course, Apple's HMD that's coming out next year. And then, of course, things like the PSVR 2 that's also set to release next year. So what makes these headsets really possible is the convergence of underlying infrastructure and technologies that create smaller, more comfortable, and higher output devices. The first is the miniaturization of screens to about 1/2 inch or smaller. These are micro OLEDs, and these have higher resolution and pixel density than most of your large flat screens in your home or your living room. And these also produce less heat. Lenses are being flattened so that you can have an image folded over many times within structure called pancake lenses, and so that these mini screens can be enlarged enough to give a greater field of view and more immersion for somebody using these in a headset. And it also allows the headset to sit closer to the eyes, giving less of a profile. It makes it more comfortable, and they start to look more like glasses or ski goggles than they do the headsets that we have out today, like the Quest. The smallest pancake lens at the moment is 6.8 millimeters and weighs about 35 grams. So you can see how that could be sort of just like glasses that you wear. The other technology that's really helping is cameras that track your physical space and then translate that data into movement and placement in the digital world. And that has also moving the external placement from the headsets to the device to the hands, and then eventually allowing us to have full body tracking. So simultaneously, these cameras can provide real-time mixed reality for distance embodiment, and also visiting and interacting virtually with others in a physical space represented digitally for the visitor. So these are considered to be many layers of this type of connection, not the least of which is infrastructure that makes up the transportation of data and the speed that data makes it more quicker and more reliable. And this also then starts to build this type of ecosystem that comes out of that we're hearing about, like the metaverse or holo projection, these types of things. So what does the future look like? So there's the technology that offers a virtual presence. So there's many foreseeable use cases for this. There's distance learning that feels like you are there. This image there at the top right shows a classroom, but this is probably different than how we see our Zoom classrooms. If you think about like how this all the distractions there were in the Zoom classroom, having the headset on really eliminates that. There's also a different type of sense of time while you're there. There is a more embodied immersion in that state. And while we might not imagine it as a classroom like this, that is one of the first uses that we're seeing it being applied to in education. There's also the collaboration space where you could imagine prototyping, designing with virtual tools that really provide inexpensive, inexhaustible materials for accurate simulation, and it's really cost effective. It's one way to reduce the barriers of equitable access to experiences, whether that's abroad or just in an environment where the students can learn. And it brings them out of their surroundings and introduces new contexts, and it can be incredibly expressive space for creativity. There's an example with Google Tilt, an app where you can create 3D images, structures, sculptures. It can also be a meeting place where you can collaborate together with groups of individuals, and there can be a blend of physical, virtual, and 2D presence within that same space, offering different perspectives and more immersion. So the most recent investment report had Zuckerberg sort of audio looking to replace laptops as productive tools, replace laptops with these headsets as productive tools. So you have more like mobile workstations. And these could be with the laptop as we see in the image there, or with a virtual laptop. And there'll be like glasses that we can take with us and just kind of pop on and ask others to come in and have conversations or create screens of various sizes, all within like, seconds. It provides much more mobility. And then if we're looking to connect people, to open them up to the world and new perspectives, extended reality really has established itself as an excellent tool to simulate the feeling of being somewhere else. This can be incredibly impactful for students. It can invite them into conversations in places with people they might not otherwise encounter or have sought out or have known. For example, in the 2019 film Traveling While Black, the viewer feels as if they are at a cafe, a very intimate setting, and hearing accounts of historical significance. And the effect is really that it broadens perspective, it reduces anxiety, and it awakens curiosity in this history. Or, for example, the 2019 film Nomads, where viewers are taken into homes and into fields, onto streams and in oceans to experience the very different ways of life lived by nomadic tribes. And this really opens viewers or students up to perspectives that they would otherwise be excluded from. And it makes the world also seem smaller, the human experience more diverse and engaging. And these kinds of films have been noted to work on connecting viewers to curiosity and empathy. So the key ingredients for them to begin connecting to other cultures and people that don't look like themselves or live like they do. We also have volumetric film, which is represented by that Western image there in the bottom. What's interesting about this is you can put on a headset and be in the film. Continually, you could pause things so you have still a frame, and you could walk around, changing your perspective from moment to moment, or you could have it play and choose where you focus your attention. There might be a subplot off in the corner that you're more interested in, or you might want to see like what happened on the other side of that, or you could actually like port yourself into the perspective of certain characters by choosing the camera that you have in this volumetric type of film. So it's a very different way of experiencing film that might be possible or is possible in the future. And with software like Google Earth, the satellite and street view images that Google has collected are transformed into 3D renderings of our world, including some curated 3D reconstructions of specific cities, and allows you to look at where things are happening when you hear about them in the news, to see them in relation to the rest of the world, the surrounding area, and to visit places that are mentioned in books or film, or to revisit places you have been and to see how they look today. So the street view, along with this 3D sort of a version of the world, it allows us to take tours of the world. And that's just a basic introduction to the technology. And now I'll hand it over to Chris, who will start talking about some of the tools that we have to create these. So you might be thinking, okay, how does somebody get started creating these experiences to be used, whether it's in your classroom or your own personal interests? A lot of what I do in the Emerging Technology Studio is sort of try to get students and faculty and staff to be able to do these things themselves. One really cool thing about like today's day and age is these tools, these softwares, hardware, devices are all starting to become really sort of consumer friendly and mainstream. You can find them a lot of the times in local libraries, elementary schools, middle schools, universities. University departments are starting to invest heavily in this type of stuff. Also, the tool or like the training to be able to do this stuff is also becoming really readily available to everybody. I know, for example, here in Columbus at the Columbus Metropolitan Library, with your free library card, you have access to LinkedIn Learning, which is formerly known as lynda.com, for really useful, in-depth, certificate courses to learn how to use, these various types of 3D tools and stuff like that. Also YouTube, who doesn't go to YouTube to try to learn something? So there's plenty of, YouTubers who are posting tutorials on how to do this stuff. The best part about all of this though, is that a lot of the software to do this is just free, which is really great, especially if you're students. Some softwares are a little more available to you that way. I know that within the ETS, students that come in, they want to make virtual experiences, and a lot of that sort of revolves around the idea of 3D assets and 3D asset creation. And what I mean by that is 3D models, 3D animations, those types of things. So if you think about like a 3D animated movie, like a Pixar movie, or if you think about a video game, those all require 3D models to be made in order to populate that environment. And 3D modeling is a very technical and, very technical process that takes a lot of time to learn and a lot of expertise. And some students have great ideas and they just don't necessarily have the time or ability to learn all the details of all these 3D tools. So a lot of what I try to do is give students sort of the power to what I like to call like 3D asset prototype. And I've been exploring with them different ways to do so. And I'm just going to share some tools with you today that you would be able to, leave this session and maybe be able to go and quickly download some of these and learn them yourself. I don't know if any of you have an iPhone 12 or 13 Pro or an iPad 2020 Pro or newer, but that's a really great device to be using with some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today.
So the first tool I'm going to mention is called Scannerverse. Scannerverse is a completely free application for iPhone 12 and 13 Pro, as well as a newer iPad Pro. What Scannerverse does, what it is it's a LiDAR scanning model building software or application. It actually uses a LiDAR scanner on your device, which I'm sure if you have one of these devices, you might not even know you have it on the back of your phone. But if you look at the image that I have on the top right, and you compare it to the iPhone that you have now, you might see a little translucent black circle. That's just this amazing piece of technology that's sort of blows my mind. It's included in these devices that you just get at your cell phone carrier, but that's a LiDAR scanner. What LiDAR scanning is it shoots little tiny beams of light out into the world. Those beams of light hit something and they reflect back. And that sort of amount of time it takes to go from point A to point B back to point A is how it can negotiate, where points fall in space. And when it takes all those points into account, it's able to actually build a really accurate 3D representation of the space you're in or the object you're trying to scan. Scannerverse is owned by Niantic, which is the same company that made like Pokemon Go and all these really cool AR apps that are currently out there in the world. I think, and one of their goals is just to get a 3D scan of everything in the planet. So why not, make this tool available for free for everybody to use. Another great thing about Scannerverse is it exports to a wide variety of 3D model formats. Some of you might not have any idea really what any of those are, but those of you that do, it exports to FBX and OBJ and USDZ and a variety of other ones, which makes the models that you get really great for using in almost any 3D program. As well as getting the spatial data to create what's called a mesh. It also takes the cameras on the back and grabs all of that image data and creates what's called a texture file that overlays on top of, this model as well. And you could literally just take this file. I could go ahead, if, my friend has an iPhone, I could text it to them and they can open it up on their phone and actually view the model in their 3D space. The next slide, I have a little demo of how the software functions. Essentially, I hit record and you sort of see that there's red and white stripes. I'm trying to fill in as much of that as I can by moving around the object at a relatively, normal speed. But also one thing to keep in mind is I don't want to overscan things. That sort of gets it confused and it'll make doubles of stuff. You'll also see that there's a range feature. So I can actually determine how far out I want to scan. And it creates a point cloud. This looks like it's a model, but actually those are all of the points that are represented in that scan. I can go ahead and process that scan. It'll give me a detailed mesh and it looks a little sloppy right here, but what I'm really able to do is go ahead and take the different crop features, crop out all of the data that I don't want from different angles. And then I'm able to actually save this model. Once I save it, I can post it straight to a great 3D model repository called Sketchfab, which some of you might be familiar with. Or I can go ahead and save it onto my phone, send it to somebody. I can open it up in my living room and, at 1:1 scale, which is really great. And this is all native to the iPhone and iPad iOS, recent iOSs. And it has object occlusion, so it's actually going to calculate where my hand is in relation to where that object would be to try to give a realistic representation of it. So not only is that a really great tool, but also it just shows you the power of the device itself that's in your pocket. Here's a couple other examples of Scannerverse. So this is actually an animation clip from a student in the Department of Art here at Ohio State from this past semester. Creating a car from scratch might take a lot of time. And even though this car might not look great, it is an art class. So, the expression and the hand of the artist is there a little bit, but you can see how it would enable that student to quickly get into their animation without having to, be technically precise. It also is a great example of some of the limitations of the technology. So if you look at the windshield of that car, it's not really there. Based on the fact that it's light that's, sending the information back to the device. If that light hits something transparent or reflective, it's going to refract and bounce all over the place. So you actually don't get good scans of glass or mirrors and things like that. On the other hand, here's a scan of an interior of Orton Hall here at Ohio State. This scan took me less than 3 minutes, and Kevin's actually going to post a link that you can go to and view this in that's interactive on Sketchfab for you. But this is a great example of like an interior scan and the abilities of Scannerverse. And the next tool I'm going to talk about is Blender. So how do you create 3D models from scratch, or how do you edit a 3D model that you got from another tool? Blender is an awesome free and open source 3D modeling software, and it's also animation software, special effects. It's amazing. For example, this GIF right here just shows you some of the rendering capabilities of it. But it's quickly becoming an industry standard right now, especially because it's free and open source. It makes it really friendly for students, freelancers, hobbyists to access and do the things that they want to do without having to pay a hefty fee for another software like Cinema 4D or Maya or any other similar 3D modeling software. Just as a tool itself, Blender also is a great render engine for staging. So say you have an awesome 3D scan you got and you want to sort of stage it for a printout or to post online, it has really great lighting capabilities to be able to do that as well. Also, it's available for Mac, Linux, PC, so it's really, really friendly for anybody to be able to download and access. Another imperative tool, and this isn't the only one that you can use to do such things, is Unity. And Unity is a real-time 3D game engine. And with Unity, you can build things out like video games, mobile and web apps and games, things like that. It's also free for non-commercial use, and it's almost fully featured, their free version, which is really awesome. Another great thing is that all of sort of the VR and AR and MR companies like Microsoft and Meta and Valve are actually supporting and making integration toolkits for you to use within Unity to sort of make your XR application work. So Unity would be a place where you actually bring all of those 3D assets you created to build out your scene and build, how you want those pieces to come together to make your virtual world appear and function. The next step you would do is, if I was using the Oculus, for example, I might download the Oculus Integration Toolkit. And what that is, that comes with all the different prefabricated cameras and things that I can just drag and drop into my scene that will allow the device to natively work with my Unity project with almost touching no line of code whatsoever. So that's really great and makes being able to create these things much more accessible and easy for anybody to also do. Also, just to mention about Unity and the different companies that are sort of building these platforms, there is a really great sort of standard that has been created in with companies like Microsoft and Oculus and Valve. It's called OpenXR, and it allows you to actually build a scene like this, for example, and export it for any device. So they're making sure that developers don't have to go through, a different pipeline for every company, but rather you can create something and then just port it to any device that you would like. Apart from 3D scanning is another very, very useful process called photogrammetry. So photogrammetry has been around for a long time, but right now it's becoming ever more popular just because of its increased use in various industries. What photogrammetry is it's the idea of taking as many possible images of an object or environment as you can from as many possible angles as possible. And then what the computer does is it's going to process all those images. It's going to recognize different reference points in each image and try to track where that reference point is from image to image. And by doing that, it's able to calculate all of these different points in space. So a really great tool that we're using right now in the ETS is called Reality Capture. And it isn't natively a free tool, but they do offer free licenses for educational and research labs. So for example, for the ETS, I was able to get up to 25 free seats for my space, which is really great. And it's been an imperative tool to the number of classes and students that have come through this year. You can see in the screenshot that I have here, this is drone footage shot by the arts and sciences videographer Scott Sprague. And what he did is he took a drone up to Orton Hall. He set sort of a geofence around the area where he wanted images to be taken with the drone. The drone just automatically flew around and snapped. I think there was like 300 some photos for this specific model. But you can sort of see the image representations with those little thumbnails in the main view of the interface. That's sort of the computer referencing where it thinks each image was taken from. And then it's able to form the different reference points, which is represented in that point cloud, and create what's called a point cloud. And then here's sort of the process from there. So we have our point cloud on the left. That's all of the data that was processed. I think there's probably millions of points there that it was able to recognize and track throughout all the images. What happens next is the computer uses those points. It connects all those points into what's called a 3D mesh, which is what you see right there in the middle. And then lastly, it takes all of that visual data and it forms a texture file, which overlays on top of the model. And we get this beautiful rendering of the Orton Bell Tower, as you can see right there. And Kevin's actually going to post a link to an interactive 3D view of the bell tower model. You'll notice it is a little touchy. The shingles in some areas aren't perfect. It's also good to keep in mind that Sketchfab compresses those model files when it's in the interactive viewer that you get on your end. But still, this is a great tool to be able to create assets, that you can use in any extended reality experience. So if you really want to create a building that's important or imperative to your experience or project, doing it from hand isn't necessary. You can use these automated modes and these free types of processing applications to actually make them for you. This is an undergraduate project done by a student named Jimmy Erkins. He's in the Department of Anthropology. I'm going to read you what his little blurb is because he's a little more articulate about it than I am. So Jimmy Erkins is an undergraduate student at Ohio State. This is for his thesis called Fluctuating Facial Asymmetry in Populations of Colobus Monkeys. He is using photogrammetry methods and software to create 3D models of monkey crania that will be analyzed to quantify fluctuating facial asymmetry. This type of asymmetry is hypothesized to coincide with early life stressors in development and has been hypothesized to have social and behavioral consequences as well. So he has 130 monkey skulls he's using this photogrammetry process with, and he's able to now take these 3D models and overlay them on top of one another on the computer to determine where different facial asymmetries exist. So this is another great example of how this technology can be used. These are a few art projects. These are actually photogrammetry scans of clay sculptures, and then the students took them and reimagined them in different softwares to do things like give them different textures or give them different effects and stuff like that. Some potential uses. So research is huge. I think that being able to create and share and view historical sites or objects remotely is awesome. I could really imagine researchers going to a location, taking a batch of photographs, bringing them back, creating this 3D model to continue their research with. Also great idea for running simulations for various areas and projects. Pedagogy, think about embedding specimens or artifacts into your learning management system for your students to interact with versus them actually having hands-on risks with those objects. Also preservation, creating digital twins of objects for your archives. In case something ever happens to them, maybe you don't have the perfect replacement, but you actually have something that accurately represents it. Also, to document steps in destructive processes such as archaeological excavations and things, you can recreate each layer again that you had to take apart to get to the bottom of an excavation site. And this is an example of a tomb experience that's also on Sketchfab that Kevin can link to for you as an example of a historical site exploration. And yeah, back to Kevin.
Yeah, so getting back then to looking at the implementation, why use it? So following up on those other use cases that Chris just provided, there is research to back up the implementation of XR in the language classroom, and it comes from other fields of inquiry. So a lot of research has shown a correlation between memory or retention of skill and knowledge in relation to the degree of embodied immersion in VR. First, in respect to surgeries that were performed after XR and traditional book study, and it was shown that there was a dramatic increase in retention for the XR users. While subsequent studies have tried to look more specifically at what is remembered and the level and type of immersion. So on the whole, the research points towards a promising correlation between retention and immersion via the use of XR. So this research could mean that connecting students in XR experiences could increase their retention of material dependent upon how immersive the content is, connecting them with experiences that would otherwise be limited to those in study abroad. Interacting with others in this virtual space, it could potentially yield similar positive effects as study abroad does for student confidence and motivation, reproducing that study abroad effect. Also, in early stages of research in VR, it's been applied to share different perspectives. Early researchers called this the empathy machine. But in more recent research has been regarded as an empathy tool that needs guidance. And it cannot on its own simply foster empathy through its use. That would be the embodiment of a viewer in another perspective. You can imagine that the content can be vastly different and prone to compounding stereotypes as much as it could be to create understanding. So that brings a host of ethical concerns with its use. And if the technology is to become ubiquitous, as it is predicted to be in the coming years, it will be as possibly as common as the smartphone. It would be pressing that educators know how to assist in providing experiences that found empathy and understanding. This research also emphasizes the necessity for educators to have a hand in the shaping of experiences for students so that they are guided and understanding can be facilitated. And this would include the inclusion, selection, and curation of content of the experiences. In the application of guided VR to treat PTSD, generalized and specific anxiety, and a host of other conditions that respond well to exposure therapy, and desensitization, these have yielded really positive results. VR exposure therapy has become more and more an established method in this and an effective means to treat these conditions, whereas something like AR does not seem to have the same type of reliability yet. So this research then demonstrates for the language teacher that VR is a viable way for students to overcome potential anxieties associated with approaching other cultures and using their language. It provides them the motivation and confidence to pursue scholarships and the experience of study abroad. So I was really struck by the definition of poverty defined by Terence Lester as one of access to opportunities and experiences. So I think really, if we could with XR allow the affordance for those who are limited by environmental, economic, and health factors to have greater access to experiences and perspectives beyond what's available in their immediate surroundings. This could include those who would be able to see beyond sort of the impoverished and depressed economic environment which they may be in, or for those who are bedridden to be able to travel again. And research has shown improvement for rehabilitation of Alzheimer's patients, in the pain management and reduction and elimination of opioids for people who've become dependent. And also it can inspire students to travel beyond the places that they call home. So how can students connect to language and culture? Well, for the next few slides, I'll go through some of the current ways in which students could encounter language or culture in these apps or in these headsets. The first of these types of apps are perhaps the most localized and what we call on rails. They're for single users, and this can be a very immersive narrative, like experiencing a book or film that plays out, and it asks you to be part of it, surrounding you with the target language and this environment. They are mostly fantastic and fictional, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there are also dialogue and vocabulary trainers like ImmerseMe and Mondly. And these guide students through different contexts and situations with a limited amount of responses that train pronunciation and also expand and work on cues for vocabulary and phrases for common practical interactions. So how can students connect to other students while being in XR? So the second type of app creates spaces, both virtual and physical, for students to co-occupy and interact with each other in. These include communicative, cooperative, and competitive scenarios. Many of these where students occupy a virtual space, they are immersed in vast open worlds with dozens to hundreds of others, which could be in the target language. They could be communicating in the target language. In addition to virtual space, there is the ability for students to co-occupy digital space that is mapped out onto a physical space. So you need more room for this, but you could create very immersive collaborative experiences where students are involved to cooperatively or competitively learn in these spaces. These can also be across different platforms. So you could have one student in VR, another on their tablet, and another on a laptop, all occupying and interacting in the same virtual space. The third type of XR is the combination of using a headset and other materials to be able to connect students in the headset with those outside. And this would be leveraging things like InfoGap. This would really be great for that, where students outside of the headset had important information for the person that is inside. And together they can cooperatively solve puzzles, or the everybody keeps talking, defuse a bomb. And groups could also participate in solving or moving through a narrative together. So even if you had that single player sort of or single user type of experience, you could have it cast to a screen, and then together you're making decisions and giving feedback about where to go, what to do, what to decide in that virtual world. So you can make it more inclusive even if it is a single user environment or app. And then there's an example of how students could work together to create an experience and immersive space across multiple platforms. And this could include a very simple scavenger hunt. And we could modify one of the lessons planned from Google Expeditions and that have students use first Google Maps, on your laptop or wherever, tablet, to create tags. And then you share these tags, you create sort of a tour for someone. And then these could provide hints to where the next location is. You could have them write down something that they find at that location, or share a photo to show that they've gotten there. And then you could have students visit these locations in Google Earth VR to virtually travel across the city and solve these puzzles. And also you could have students visiting that location with their AR. So the actual real physical space where they could hold up their phones and see the tags that either the people in VR have left or the people that have designed it in Google Maps have left. And they could leave those tags as well. And you could do this very simpler with either these treasure hunt apps that are available on phones or QR codes. And there's much more beyond the classroom. So for example, you could use VR to visualize data in 3 dimensions spread out across space, where you could use, for example, there's in 2008 or after the 2008 stock market crash, there was someone who gave you the perspective of the stock market rise and fall as if it were a roller coaster that you were on. So this is new ways to experience data, geometry, calculus, or graphs that includes Buckeye VR, which is from here. And the first-hand experience of physics, the ability to see chemical structures, manipulate those, identify them, to view microorganisms at a larger scale, to see inside of cells at a larger scale, or become part of that cell, or have HMD augmented surgery. So you could understand the anatomy, save on costs, and it's a very immersive environment. So you could also train to see your own body as it performs with instantaneous visual and data feedback, which allows for quick correction and honing of techniques. It's already being applied in baseball, hockey, and dance. And it's also applied in the treatment of pain, as I mentioned before. You could also experience news as if on the spot, or a book in a new way, focused reading or visualized abstraction, to experience film in new ways by being there.
You could also reduce the costs of materials for art and music. Many of those programs that get usually cut first, and when there's budget issues. So to experience this type of creation of art and music, you could do that differently by using haptic sensors in the body. So you could see and visualize and feel wavelengths as something physically felt and seen. You can also prototype designs, share and show them to colleagues to increase design times and to be able to test out the designs and simulations, to show potential clients the buildings you plan to build for them, have them be inside the building, or to create designs or collaborate across vast distances together. You can also embody training, so lowering the risks and costs of training in dangerous or expensive equipment, or to work through a sales pitch with low stakes and an option to repeat and to improve and practice this performance. So last but not least, there are some challenges. So how does VR, which is a primarily visual medium, address accessibility challenges? Well, XR is actually not exclusively visual in its immersive techniques. It also includes what's called haptics, which are tiny motors that are devices that make you feel vibrations that correlate to the visual and audio sound effects. And 3D spatial audio, which is part of Unity and Unreal Engine, they adjust the volume to the 3D distance of the camera and viewer to the objects that are surrounding them. So it creates a sensation of things moving past you, or you moving past things, or nearing you, or moving away from you, and also gives you a sense of when something might be behind you. So in adapting that to some experimentation, there is early use of in-ear haptics that can vary in intensity and have been used to simulate object location for the hearing impaired as to where a sound may be coming from. Likewise, there has been the implementation of the simulation of vibrations along with the 3D spatial sound for the visually impaired, as well as specialized haptic canes to simulate when you are moving, how you are moving within that 3D space and connecting with 3D objects. Also, captions that move with the viewer help with the transcription, and improved eye and face tracking can help with mouth and lip reading for the hearing impaired. There's also advanced hand tracking that identifies and reconstructs the skeletal location of your fingers and hands to facilitate in ASL, or to learn it or to use it in VR. So these are not difficult to implement. They are actually part of the Unity. Well, I've used Unity most, so I'm familiar with that. But as part of that, it's very simple. It's something you just have to equip and turn on. And so, so they just need to be thought of, and then they could be implemented with the devices that are currently in development. And then with that, I'm going to take another look at our chat, and we'll open this up to questions.
I saw one question up there a second ago from Amy. Yeah. Is there documentation or recommendations for preserving and archiving these 3D digital assets, such as the hundreds of photos created through the photogrammetry process? Just thinking about the environmental impact of unlimited cloud storage, etc. That's a really great question. So, I mean, what you could do is there is part of this idea of like, okay, the photogrammetry technology will get better. So if you have an archive of all those photos, maybe later down the line, you get a better model. But if, the environmental impact is a concern, you could just purge and delete all of those photos. You could also store them on a local device versus throwing them on cloud storage. You could do the same exact thing with the digital 3D models also.
I also saw a question by from Donnie about the work on VR environments to help with anxiety issues during the pandemic. Yeah, that was, there are actually several apps that focus on meditation, on brainwave feedback, and research looking at how VR could help with anxiety. Especially during the pandemic, this became sort of a way to move about or feel like you're not trapped within those four walls, and that's still ongoing. But there is work on that, and there is research on that. And from what I've seen of that research that was previous to the pandemic, there has been great gains in positive results working with anxiety issues and exposure therapy, desensitization, and also many first sort of anecdotal evidence of people who use social VR apps to overcome their own social anxiety. Whereas being inside a headset can be very isolating. Once you start to move from those single user to the multi-user types of apps, you start connecting with other people. And I've met people from all over the world in things like VR chat. And it's really, you get some really good conversations, and you feel like you're connecting with people in that way. So yeah, I'd be interested in like going further with that. Some of the early uses for VR also were to give doctors and family members the idea of what life was like for people suffering from mental health issues as well. So it was very early on kind of being used as an empathy sort of device.
Could we go back to the multi-user slide? Let me see. I did see some comments about more accessible controllers becoming a priority. I completely agree. I think being a public educational institution, there is a huge priority and importance for us to provide and make content that's accessible to everybody. I see that as a huge potential for public institutions to sort of lead that front line on creating stuff like that. I hope as the price comes down for hardware and we're able to experiment with a little more, that can really make some leaps and bounds.
Yeah. In addition to that, the goal, I think, with Meta, like Meta's consumer model, is to really advance their hand tracking. They had an update about a week or two ago with a hand tracking 2.0, which is really, really good. And so that would facilitate, there's gesture-based sort of commands that you can use with your hands. And there used to be a problem with like crossover, losing the tracking of the hand, and that's actually been solved. The other hand tracking issues is if it's behind you or not. But definitely, there are other devices in the works, like a wristband where it would sense your electrical impulse and like what you actually are intending to do with your hand. So there's a lot of things that are being developed. Those cost a lot of money to develop them, but the more adoption there is, the lower the costs. And especially Meta's model is that they're going with one pro sort of model being released every 2 years and one mass consumer model being released every 2 years. And the mass consumer model, they probably take a loss on the hardware and make up with on the software or whatever type of tracking they're doing.
We have about a minute left. Do we have any other questions?
Well, I'd like to thank you guys all for coming. And this looks like a really good conversation that's going on in the chat too, with a lot of great recommendations and comments. So thank you guys. Thank you all for attending, and hopefully get to see you in another space here later today or in the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.